John Scott Shepherd, you created the DirecTV series You, Me, Her, which is about a married couple who opens up their marriage to a woman they both develop feelings for. It's inspired by the article Sugar on Top by John H. Richardson. So what about that article inspired you?
I have to be really honest. I'm sure it's a great article. I actually didn't read it because I could tell from like the synopsis of it, you know, the bolder type, that it wasn't what I was interested in doing. It was very much about sugar daddies and sugar babies and sex people. And the whole idea, I strangely enough had already been thinking about alternative relationships, particularly polyamory, whether it was two couples or a third being brought in. And this was so not what I wanted. So my fellow executive producer said that I kept giving him the stiff arm, the Heisman, because I wouldn't go in for a meting because it was like, yeah, I don't want to do this. I want to do my own show. It's going to be completely different. But I finally went in, and so did they. And they hadn't read the article either. And it was just like they were interested in polyamory. And so right from the get-go, my pitch has been the way we did the show, the way we wrote it, the way we shot it, everything, which was, what if? Like, what if this, we wanted to create a sense of, oh, this could happen to me. These are ordinary people. They're not on the 74th floor in a penthouse wearing, you know, feathered masks or anything. And so it's like, you know, you, me, and people we know, and even Izzy, who is sort of the Hesher, you know, character who sort of comes in and turns their life upside down, is the accidental escort, I call her. I mean, she's not really particularly good at it. She doesn't sleep with her clients. She's just, you know, sort of somebody you know, recreate a scenario or something you want to do with, and she doesn't really like it, and she always wants to quit, and this is how she meets them. That's the only real importance of it, is we needed somebody probably to be in, you know, even a sort of safe version of the sex trade, to put her in their life in that context, that they had problems in their marriage. And so making it believable, but then also sort of playing with a different vibe of aspirational dialogue, like from cinematic romantic comedies, as opposed to kind of a mumblecore indie feel, which is super pervasive in that indie half-hour world, streaming and premium. We just wanted to be different. So we wanted it to be a romantic comedy, you know, with rhythm to the dialogue and everything.
Where did that spark first come from to explore the idea of polyamory in like a television series like this?
That's a really good question. Why do things pop into your brain? It was kind of in the zeitgeist. CNN had just done a documentary. So it sort of was of interest to me that polyamory, and that's where I came up with that line that's in the show, that polyamory is polygamy's younger, cooler cousin, is that it had become not a religious-based thing or cultural. Now it was just normal people choosing to invite a third person in. And I discovered that there was a whole culture and an association, and you know, they're very dedicated to it. And it is, and having met them now in New York, they're normal people. It really isn't like, you know, a whole bunch of people you can quickly identify as, oh, those are sex people. You know, you could tell the way they're dressed, the way they're acting. They weren't. They were totally normal. And that's what I wanted to see. I was so happy to see that because, you know, I'd already made the show at that point. But, you know, it just was in the air. And so you start asking yourself, at least I do, this is the way I work, like, what version of this would I want to watch on TV? That I would find interesting and connective, and I would find my way into it, and I would see who I was and everything. And then that's when it became like, what if an ordinary suburban married couple, what would have to happen, what dominoes would have to tumble to put them in that situation? And that's sort of how we worked backwards, like, okay, this is a believable way in, and let's stay there. So they're always sort of, are we really doing this? It's a constant, are we doing this? And are we ruining our lives? And we shouldn't be doing, you know, they're constantly pulling back, and I think that never goes away for any of them. And I think that creates conflict, because if you can, in those movies about alternative relationships, they're always, they live in a rarefied world where there are no consequences, there are no stakes, there's no judgment from your community, because you can do anything. Like, you're uber rich and you live in some strange, I don't know, like alternate universe, and anything goes. And we didn't want that.
You created the show and you wrote all 10 episodes of the first season. What was that process like? Did you write the entire season ahead of time in like one shot, or were you writing as the season progressed?
No, I wrote it all before we shot, because we cross-boarded the whole season like a 5-hour movie. We shot it like a movie, which is why we can look at feature directors. You know, it really does work better. You know, we find people whose work is more informative to what we're doing. You know, I started writing novels, so I decided to approach this as a 10-chapter novel. And I asked, and the cool thing about working with kind of newish networks like Audience and E1 is that I said, this is what I want to do. I don't want you to give me notes on every episode. You know, I'd already given them a document saying this is the season. You know, I sort of the story of the season in 18 to 20 pages. So they knew what to expect. And I said, as I turn in the episodes, which was one a week for 10 weeks, as I do that, don't give me notes unless your hair's on fire. You know, it's like, unless I really screwed it up. Otherwise, let's wait. Let's wait, because I think I might get to chapter 9 and it'll change something in chapter 2. You know, and it allowed me that freedom to write it like a book in my pajamas in this office right here, and not get out of that zone. And so I think it's sort of that beautiful mess theory. It definitely is a single voice show. It's an authored show, we call it. So it has a point of view, it has a style, and if there's something wrong with it, I think it's a good kind of wrong.
The first season takes place over a relatively short period of time, just 10 days. And I'm wondering, did that sort of arise naturally from the story, or did you have the idea that you wanted that first season to be this intense period of time?
Yeah, I definitely, that was part of the plan. And part of the pitch is I said, I really want this to feel like a hurricane. You know, a hurricane came into their lives, and the whole life of the series is like that, quite frankly. I didn't want this to live over years, because I thought that either they'd settle in and they'd realize this is their truth, or they'd go, okay, this was crazy, all our friends were right. If the whole series takes place in sort of a True Blood kind of way, where it's like every day is real time almost. So the first season's 10 days. We pick it up, right, second season picks up right where we left off. So the life of the series might be 3 months, you know, if we go 5-6 years. And I like that energy, and I like it in a lot of streaming and premium cable shows, that there is this next day. I always call it next day. What happens next? What would your next day be like? And if I jump ahead too many weeks between episodes, I'm like, what was going on? This is such a heightened situation that they're bathing in it. You know, they're living it every second. They can't really stop.
You mentioned shooting it sort of like a 5-hour movie, and you know, the director of all 10 episodes is Nisha Ganatra, and she's done work on Transparent, and she's done a lot of other TV work. How did you come on board to the show, and what do you think she brought to it that was unique?
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, we have to follow CanCon rules. So the people that we hire to direct have to have some version of Canada in them. You know, like they either have to have a passport or you know, they have to be citizens of both countries or something. So that whittles down, you know, the availabilities right away. So we were really like, ideal world with someone who's done Prestige or Peak Half Hour in America, because Canadian comedy is very different. It's a very different vibe. So it doesn't help us much if they've done a lot of comedy. Nisha had done, you know, Married, and she'd done some other shows, you know, Red Oaks and Transparent that she was on for the whole run with Jill. And she seemed like a really good fit. And she had done the right work, and she'd done some independent film, Chutney Popcorn. And we met and we vibed. I mean, it was just like we really liked the same things. She referenced Woody Allen and working title movies, which I had already referenced. She was saying the same things I was saying. So the idea of writing it like a feature and then shooting it like a feature made sense. You know, to do one without the other didn't, and it carried through. And we didn't have a lot of problem with the crossboarding with shooting out an entire set because the time frame that you mentioned. The actors were not trying to jump around emotionally you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 days down the line, it was like tomorrow, you know, and so that worked. It worked. We had way fewer problems than we thought we would, but we definitely learned, you know, I mean, you don't know until you do it, because not too many people have done it, certainly none of us. So, you know, we go into season 2 with our eyes more open.
The central romantic trio is played by Greg Poehler and Rachel Blanchard as the married couple, and then Priscilla Faya as the third, Izzy, the accidental escort. You know, since obviously their chemistry is so important to the dynamic of the show and the success of the show, what was the casting process like for those roles?
We got lucky, to be honest with you, because we had 3 people coming from wildly different backgrounds. Rachel is super experienced, been acting her whole life, has done a blend of comedy and drama, you know, is very trained. Priscilla's pretty new, and she hadn't done a lot of different things. And Greg's, you know, been in the business for 2 years. You know, he was a lawyer before that, and then got into improv companies. You talk about 3 people who have nothing in common and how they came to this point. But I knew with each of them, there was no like, oh, it's close between these 2. As soon as Greg was available, I knew I wanted him, because I liked his show, and I more liked, and I think he hates when I say this, like, he's really good at not acting. It's not that he's not good at acting, he's really good at not acting. Like, he seems like a real guy living a real life and not an actor. And we had some pretty big names who wanted to do it, but I just kept seeing them as actors. And Greg seemed like a real person. I was aware of Rachel, and I think she's highly underrated and should be a superstar. She's amazing, not just at, you know, having chops, but her ability to improv is crazy. I mean, I knew that Greg could improv, but she's intellectual improvs. They're really good. And Priscilla just, you know, she only got to read 1 script. The others got to read like the whole series. And we cast her last. She read 1 script and fell in love with it, and came in, and we were in the Sutton Bar in Vancouver, and it's like, oh, you're Izzy. She had this specificity rather than just sort of the generic manic pixie dream girl who's going to turn your life upside down. It could have been really stock. She just has something so specific. And I think that's why people are really responding to her, and she's getting some attention.
Now, you know, the dynamic of three people in a romantic relationship is complicated under any circumstance. But you know, did it make it sort of complicated to write this story in a way? Did it sort of take the romantic comedy idea and sort of change it in this way?
No, I mean, it was all fun. It wasn't really a struggle. We literally took Billy Murnett's like romantic comedy structure. He wrote the book on it. And we're starting with meeting cute right through the race to the airport, basically, is we said, let's write it like a classic Julia Roberts, Sandy Bullock, you know, right through Silver Linings Playbook kind of romantic comedy, right to Climbing the Trellis or Running Down Broadway or whatever. But then let's make it 3 people. And once you do that, it, you know, I don't want to say it writes itself because it doesn't, but it does, you start seeing how it would work. So it was really, once we committed to that, once we committed to the vibe, even though it looks indie, to go ahead and be okay with some rhythm and some spikes and some big emotional moments, and not be like a slave to irony, as I call it, and not be a slave to low ebb emotions and sort of quietness. Once we did that, it just freed us. It freed us to write something incredibly specific and distinctive, I hope.
Now, while the polyamorous relationship is the central focus of the show, you also create a lot of other relationships for these characters, fleshing them out. You know, like Izzy and her best friend Nina, they have this relationship that gets really, you know, much more deeply explored, especially by the end of the season.
More than we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, did any of that, you know, surprise you along the way of writing, of how other relationships that you were creating were starting to kind of blossom in a way you weren't expecting?
Yeah, that one specifically, it happened in the writing, and then it happened even more when you meet Priscilla and Melanie and see how they became instant best friends in real life, that those scenes were working. So I did start like writing it up, and the response on Twitter and social media, I would say if there's one thing people write about more than anything else, it's that relationship between two young women that doesn't feel goofy. And Melanie sort of rose above the idea of the best friend and became a character in her own right and earned the right to tell a long story about someone we haven't met, like breaking all the rules, and it works. And you go, oh, I don't know why that worked, but it worked. And so a lot of these characters, we've earned the right in season 2 to give them arcs that aren't, wholly connected to the polyamory.
As you mentioned, season 2 is coming up, but also season 3, the show was renewed for 2 more seasons. What was your reaction when you got the official word on that?
Well, I heard whispers of it first, and it was like, what? It just never occurred to me, and it's so exciting and sets up your ability to think of the show longer term and getting that kind of commitment and let's not change anything, because the second shoe to drop is, hey, let's have a room now. And I didn't want to change anything. It's just everything worked so well. It's sort of like being an athlete with his little superstitions. It's like we wanted to keep the same people. We wanted to write it the same way. We wanted to use a single director format again. Kind of doing it the same way that worked. And it's a privilege on 2 levels. One, that they're giving me so much creative freedom, and they trust me, and they know at the end, they can still have their 2 cents. And then to do it, go do it the same way again. It will give you the same kind of freedom. It's like a dream job. And I'm in my pajamas right now, below screen.
I'm just wearing like basketball shorts under.
That's awesome. You've got a button-up shirt and basketball shorts.
Oh, absolutely. You only need to look presentable from here up on these things.
I actually have a crop top on. It's I'm rocking the belly.
Now, with seasons 2 and 3 coming up, do you have those already plotted out in your head? Did you have sort of a long-term idea for it when you first started it, or is that something that you're going to be developing now?
I do. Unlike Lost, I actually do know what the end game is, and I mean, because I think it's the boldest way to go. I'll just say that. And so when you work backwards from that, just like we knew how we wanted season 1 to end, and kind of were able to work backwards from that. Yeah, I do. And you have a lot of time on set, obviously, and I'm talking to 2 of the 3 actors who write. And you have a lot of people that once you form sort of a loose, comfortable set, feel really comfortable coming up and going, hey, what if? And so I'm like, I'll steal from anybody. So through the span of season 1, season 2 was definitely taking shape. I knew how I wanted it to begin, and I knew how I wanted it to end.
Now, it's interesting is that season 1, sort of, beginning it, from beginning to end, is sort of the romantic comedy formula, as you mentioned, to the race to the airport, but that it ended where sort of most romantic comedies kind of end, and so now season 2, it looks like we might take it a step farther. How do you feel about being able to take that formula and sort of take it even deeper in season 2 to places that maybe the formula doesn't always account for?
Yeah, you're right. You can only do that once. You can only do the meet cute through the race to the airport once. At the end of season 1, we really want Greg's expression to say, I don't remember talking about this, inviting her to live with us. And he gives just that little bit of, maybe everything's not exactly right. And that informs season 2 quite a bit, which we pick up right in that moment. We literally pick it up, again, very True Blood-ish, like right where we left off. If season 1 is, about, holy crap, are we really going to do this? And it's the romantic comedy arc. Season 2 is about trying to stay together when everything in the world is tearing them apart, and then realizing you can lock the door or build a moat or whatever we said in season 1, but really your biggest problem is right inside with you. It's each other. And 3 is the oddest number. And if you talk to anyone, relationships, like you said, are hard enough. But when you have 3 people, it's really hard. It's hard. So over the span of time, you have to come to believe this is really their truth. And if underlying all the storytelling is that sort of conceit, that against all odds, they're better off in this formation, so to speak, than they would be in any other coupling. And they realizing that sort of has to combat everything else, which is a lot within themselves, the emotional stakes, the sense of this just doesn't fit in the world I live in, or I feel like I'm getting pushed out. I'm becoming the third wheel. And eventually this will reconfigure itself in a more traditional way. And they take turns feeling that way, which we understand from the community happens all the time, and how hard it is to be three.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the show and season 2 and season 3 coming up also. And thank you so much for talking to me today.
You bet, man. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.